All right, we've been looking at Antiochus Epiphanes. He called himself Antiochus God Manifest. We saw that he attempted to take over Egypt, but he was thwarted in that by whom? Rome. And the ships came from, where do you remember?
Cyprus.
From
Cyprus? No, Crete.
Crete.
Yeah.
Down and stopped him from taking over Egypt. And so on his way back home to Syria, he has to pass by Jerusalem. And he's reminded of what a thorn the Jews are to him, because they refuse to what? Change to being Greek, which is called what? Hellenism. Also, Jason thought that Antiochus had been killed, and he took over once again, got rid of many lost, and so on. But so Antiochus Epiphanes comes to Jerusalem, and he's mad about what happened in Egypt. He's mad at the Jews, and really decides to wipe out this religion altogether. So what are some of the things that he does? Well, he kills a bunch of people. What else? Enslaves women and children.
He raids houses like monthly.
Raids houses.
Raids, like goes in there and searches them.
For what?
Bibles.
All right. So what's he doing with them? What's he doing with the copies of Torah? Burning them. What else?
He's forcing them to eat pig, and he makes
Especially who?
pigs.
The priests. What's he doing before he forces them to eat pig?
And you desecrate the temple with like the pig water.
Yeah, before he does that though, he's got to have a pig. What?
He's got to sacrifice.
He sacrifices a pig on the altar and forces the priest to eat it, and then uses the pig juice sprinkled all over the temple to desecrate the temple. So he's done about everything he can do to wipe out the Jewish religion. He's also burning copies of Torah. What else did he forbid besides Torah? Teaching the Torah.
Circumcision.
Circumcision. What else?
They caught someone circumcised and hanged them around their mother's necks and thrown them.
Throw them off the wall.
Yeah, throw them off.
Yeah. What else did he forbid? Keeping
Keeping the Sabbath.
the Sabbath, and also any festivals or feasts that were associated with Jewish religion. So basically, you stop being a Jew altogether. Have nothing left. That's what he wants. Well, in order to enforce that even more, he decides he needs to go outside of Jerusalem. And so we're going to see today, under the title Macabbean Revolt, is that he is going out to other towns and finding priests there, because all the priests didn't live in Jerusalem, they lived all over the place, and getting priests there in these other towns to sacrifice the pig, and therefore he's going to get rid of all the priests and get all the villages involved in becoming Hellenistic. So, we see first of all, there in a little town called Modin, 17 miles northwest of Jerusalem, there lived a Jewish priest named Mattathias of the house of Hasmon. That's the last name, so to speak. He had 5 sons. This priest had been selected by the king's religious ambassador, Apelles, to make the offering and to be the first to taste the flesh of the pig. So, and everybody else in the village would follow. Well, Mattathias coldly refused the offer and stood before Apelles waiting to be struck down. He figured he'd be killed right there on the spot. Suddenly, a man from the village advanced toward the officer, offering to make the sacrifice on behalf of the people there. And with that, he took the knife and walked to the altar. The soldier raised the struggling pig and placed it before the man. As the man began to raise the knife, Mattathias had just taken all he could. He was outraged by this. And so he jumped on the man, wrested the knife from him, and plunged it into the villager. And before the astonished Apelles could react, he killed him too. Well, emboldened by this act, the priest's 5 sons and other men of the town quickly dispatched the remaining soldiers with daggers. So they're all dead. But they've started something now. They have given armed resistance to Epiphanes' soldiers. So the Jewish revolt was on. Mattathias and his sons fled into the mountains, and from there they conducted guerrilla warfare. Look at verse 33. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. The next sentence in the history. Many joined them, and other maskalim, which literally means men who show wisdom. These men would act in a ministry of education and evangelism, as it were, among their own countrymen, urging them first to get back to God and to pattern their lives according to Scripture. So these righteous ones, these men who show wisdom, were going around the countryside trying to convince their Jewish brothers to get back to God, to repent, come back to God, and start living their lives according to Scripture. So they're the evangelists of their time. Then they were to answer the call to arms and hazard their very lives for the liberation of their land from the yoke of their God-hating persecutor. Come back to God, start living your life according to Scripture, and then fight. The Syrian persecution had led to a revolt of the Hasidim. That's what they came to be called, the Hasidim, those that were serious about following God. Before they had refused to obey Antiochus Epiphanes, but also refused to fight. But now they fought, but not on the Sabbath. And so they were therefore slaughtered. Look over at Daniel 11:33. Yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity, by plunder, for many days. The word fall, you notice, literally stumble, refers to severe suffering on the part of many and death for others. One of Mattathias' sons was named Judas. See him here in the middle. He's the eldest. He was nicknamed Maccabeus, meaning the hammer. Can you imagine what kind of guy he was? Judas the hammer. Sort of gives you the idea that he's a strong guy, doesn't take any guff from anybody, right? Well, the revolt's named after him. He becomes the leader. It's called the Macabbean Revolt. A large number of these original patriots died in their first engagement with the king's troops because they refused to fight in their own defense on the Sabbath, the day in which they were attacked. Well, they revised their policy after that tragic slaughter and decided that they would fight even on the Sabbath if compelled to do so. Then they engaged in vigorous attacks on all their fellow Jews who had bowed to Antiochus' ordinance and forsaken their God. So they not only fought against the Syrians, they also went after Jews that were siding with the Syrians. Not long afterward, Mattathias died. We don't know if it was from illness or if he'd been wounded. But he entrusted the leadership of the Israelite forces to his sons, in particular Judas, the eldest. Now look over verse 34. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in hypocrisy. In year 165, Judas was the first that made a league of friendship with the Romans. So that's those who are going to help them. They get a little help from the Romans. For the next few years, Judas successfully led an army of Jews against the Syrians. Judas Maccabeus assumed the military leadership and gained a brilliant victory over the forces of Apollonius, whom he slew in battle. Judas' second triumph involved riding an even larger army under Saron. A third army of formidable proportions came down from Syria under Lysias, Antiochus' deputy, equipped with a fearsome elephant corps. And what I have there next actually belongs later. I have this too early in this tale, so we'll come back to what happens with Eleazar. But you can find all of what happens here in this revolt in the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are included in many Bibles as part of the Apocrypha. And if you'd like to read those books for either reading project or for extra credit, you're free to do that. In 164, Jerusalem was freed by Judas Maccabeus. So finally captured Jerusalem. Not long after that, the insane Antiochus IV died during a campaign against Persia and was replaced by his son, also named Antiochus. Why not use the name over and over again? All right, so they've captured the temple. On December 25th, 164 BC, under the leadership of Judas Maccabeus, the Jewish patriots cleansed and rededicated the temple that Antiochus IV had defiled. And that completed the 2,300 days mentioned in Daniel 8:14, from September 6, 171 BC, which was the beginning of the desecration. Now, how did this take place? As you can see later, this is going to become a Jewish holiday, but we'll explain how that happened. As the victorious Jews went about rededicating the temple and its materials, they came across a problem. In order to rededicate the temple, they needed to burn the menorah, that is the lampstand, for 8 days. The problem is they only had enough oil for 1 day. Well, make more oil, right? But the whole oil's not holy unless it's made in a temple that's dedicated to God. So you see the problem? They can't dedicate the temple to God because they don't have enough oil for the menorah, but they can't make more oil because the temple's not dedicated to God. So what would you do? Throw up your hands and say, well, we did our best, so long, didn't work out. What would you do? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They said, we'd have to do the best we can with what we've got. And we'll put the oil in for the 1 day's oil in the menorah, and we'll light it, and that's all we can do. Miraculously, the oil burned for 8 days. And so they came to call, they celebrated a festival because of that. Every year, they call it the Festival of Lights, because it was the lights of the menorah.
Isn't that what Hanukkah is?
Which we now call also Hanukkah, yes. And it takes place in December, as you probably know. Celebrated with a 9-branch menorah, or lampstand. This one is not 9. I couldn't find a good picture of 9. So that's, let's see, that's 7. So there are more. There's one in the middle that is the lamp from which they light all the others. And they light 1 lamp each day from that one in the middle. Remember the dreidel? Well, they incorporated that into the celebration as well. And so part of celebrating Hanukkah is playing the game with the dreidel. It's become a part of it as a real game, not now to fool anybody, but as a real game. And this is how it's played. There are letters on each side, of 4 sides. There is a noon, and then there is a gimel, and then hey, and then sheen. And those letters all stand for words in Hebrew, which translated is a great miracle happened there. So when you're looking at the dreidel, if you are a Hebrew person, you see those letters and you remember a great miracle happened there. And you recall what occurred with the lighting of the lamp. Okay, here's how the game is played. If we had less people, we might sit down and play a game, but it would take way too long with this many of you. But I'll give you an idea of what's done. Each person, sits down in a circle, maybe around a table or on the floor, and each person has a pile of candy or nuts, And each person antes up. He puts one in the pot. And then once you've done that, the first player spins the dreidel, and whatever letter comes up indicates what they do. If noon comes up, they don't take anything. So noon means none. If a gimel comes up, they take everything. If a hay comes up, they take half. And if a sheen comes up, they have to add a piece to the pot. If a player gets a gimel, then everybody puts one piece back in to the pot. All right, so that might be a fun thing to do. Part of the celebration of Hanukkah. Any questions? Oh, by the way, this one is made so that you can open up and put the candy or nuts inside. So when you get the whole pot, you take the dry and dump it all out. Well, they had a lot of questions about what to do, what procedure should they follow, and they didn't really have any answers for everything because there is no king anymore. Remember, most, if not at least many of the priests are no longer functioning. So their decision was to delay any matters that they weren't sure what to do until there should come a prophet to show what should be done with them. It says someday the prophet will come, and he will tell us what to do. Well, eventually that prophet did come, didn't he? And his name is Jesus. Well, the liberation of Jerusalem caused a mass exodus of the Jewish Hellenizers to nearby Greek cities. They figured, okay, we embrace Greek culture, and now the serious Jews are back in control. We better leave. And so they went to nearby cities that were Greek. Well, they were mistreated in those cities because those people didn't like Jews, and especially in the city of Jaffa, which is over here. Here's Jerusalem, and then there's Jaffa, and other cities along here. In Jaffa, Jews were, 200 of them were taken by boat out into the Mediterranean Sea and drowned. Well, even though these were Hellenized Jews, Judas Maccabeus still didn't think it was right for them to be just killed like that. And so he attacked and conquered all the Greek cities where Jews were mistreated. Well, Antiochus IV's son, Antiochus V, got together 50,000 footmen, 5,000 horsemen, and 80 elephants and marched through Judea into the mountainous parts. He took several places you can see there in your notes. I'm not going to read all of that. Let's drop down to before the forces joined battle, Judas's brother Eleazar, seeing the very highest of the elephants, adorned with a large tower and with military trappings of gold to guard him, supposing that Antiochus himself was on that elephant, he ran a great way before his own army, and cutting his way through the enemy's troops, he got up to the elephant. But he could not reach him who seemed to be the king, by reason of his being so high. But he still ran his weapon into the belly of the beast and killed the elephant. But as a result, what happened? The elephant then fell on him and crushed him to death. Now that he had governed, the one who was in charge of the elephant wasn't Antiochus at all. He was just a private citizen. Well, the Jews fought it out bravely for a long time, but the king's forces under Antiochus V were superior in number. They were lucky at times, it seemed, and they obtained the victory. Now, when a great many of his men were slain, Judas took the rest with him and fled. So Antiochus went back to Jerusalem, but he only stayed there for a few days because he lacked supplies. And so he left again. But he did leave a garrison behind him, which he thought was enough to keep the peace. But the rest of his army he took with him. And decided we're going to spend the winter in Syria. in Syria. After that, there was an attempt to search for all of Judah's leaders and supporters and to wipe them out. We look over verse 35, and some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Well, Judas didn't sit around after Antiochus V took over Jerusalem. He got busy, got many of his own people to support him, gathered together those that had escaped out of the battle, and fought against Antiochus' generals at a place called Adasa. And it was too hard for his enemies in the battle. He killed a great number of them, and he at last himself was slain. Judas chose to die bravely in battle rather than to save his life through a strategic retreat. And not many days afterwards, his brother, John, or Yohanan, became the leader. There was a plot against him by Antiochus' party, and he was killed by them in an ambush. So Judas has died in battle. John's been killed in ambush. Eleazar was killed in battle as well. Not long before the tide. It was not long before the tide turned, and Jonathan, who had replaced Judas as leader, was able to defeat the Syrian forces, retaking Jerusalem, and to compel them to retreat to Antioch. In 152, Jonathan had become high priest. He was able to rebuild his forces and expand the territory of Israel, but the Syrians offered to negotiate, but it was just a ruse. They took him captive and assassinated. That was the ambush of John. He was followed in his position of high priest by his brother Simon, or Simeon, sometimes you see. And so he's the next person. Now, in fact, he's the only. I'm sorry, there's Jonathan there. Let's see, which one was it? Jonathan was the one that was ambushed and assassinated. So we still have John and Simon. Simon becomes the leader. And not long after that, Antiochus sent his general with an army to go through Judea, subdue Simon. But Simon was getting older now, but he conducted the war as if he were a much younger man. He also sent his sons with a band of strong men against Antiochus, while he took part of the army himself with him and fell upon him from another quarter, so they attacked from two sides. He also laid a great many men in ambush in many places in the mountains, was superior in all his attacks upon them, and when he had been conqueror after so glorious a manner, he was made high priest. And also freed the Jews from the dominion of the Macedonians after 170 years of the empire. So, the last paragraph. Thus, the cause of freedom was maintained through vicissitudes of defeat and success, I mean, back and forth between defeat and success, till finally a strong Jewish kingdom was founded by John Hyrcanus, who is the son of Simon. And he enlarged Israel to its full extent. He and his son, Alexander Janneus, or Alexander Jannicus, sometimes spelled. So he expands Israel because Alexander Jannicus is going to add Idumea, Transjordan, and Samaria. So it expands Israel to almost the borders as it was under David and Solomon. All right, so if you look underneath, next in your notes, you see Hasmonean rule. We're going to look at some of the characters there. We talked about Simon already. You can see that he assumed the office of high priest once again. He gathered together a great assembly, and this is important because that's where the Sanhedrin came from. It was this great assembly that he brought together. The aristocratic party, that is the wealthy landowners, were also Hellenizers, and they constituted a majority of the assembly. And then they elected Simon as high priest. Well, Simon was poisoned while visiting his son-in-law near Jericho. As you begin to look at what happens to the Hasmonean family, you're going to wonder, are they any better than the Ptolemies and the Seleucids? Because we're going to see the same kind of stuff going on. His son-in-law also imprisoned Simon's wife and 2 sons and sent some men to kill John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus is the one that expanded all the territory here. But he did something that is going to come back later to be a negative. And that is especially when he captured Idumea, he forced the people living there, the Edomites, to become Jewish. Forced conversions. You must become a Jew or die. Now, who are the Edomites? Who are they descended of? No? Edomites are descendants of Esau. So they are all traditionally enemies of Israel, and he's forcing them to become Jewish. We're going to see that a little bit later, what effect that has. Notice that John Hyrcanus broke with the Pharisees. The Pharisees are what comes out of the Hasidim. The Hasidim were the righteous ones, the ones fighting for God's law. And John Hyrcanus says, enough of that. I'm going to embrace Hellenism. Now think about it. Why was his grandfather fighting to begin with? Great-grandfather. Why was he fighting? Because Antiochus Epiphanes was trying to force them to become Greek, to be Hellenized, and say, we're not going to do it. We're going to hold on to God's law. Well, now here we come down to Alexander Jannaeus, and what's he doing? He's embracing Hellenism. So what was the point of this whole thing? Except that the Jewish people have control of their land, but if they become Greek, it defeats. I mean, if Mattathias could have known what was going on, he would have rolled over his grave. So would all these guys. To think that the Alexander Jannaeus is going to embrace Hellenism. Well, he was considered both prince and high priest. And you can read what it says about him there. The next person that comes along when Alexander Jannaeus dies is Aristobulus. He gained power, he gained his position by killing his own mother and murdering 3 of his brothers. How are the Jews acting any better than the Ptolemies or the Seleucids? They're not, are they? He ascended to the throne and declared himself king. Does he have the right to be king over Israel? No. He's not of the lineage of David. In fact, he's in the line of priests. At this time, he makes Galilee part of the kingdom. And he forced conversions up there, especially the people living up in the Golan Heights. Aristobulus was a brutal ruler. Yes?
Who was the rightful heir of that?
I don't, I have no idea. I'm sure the line of David was continuing because we know when we get to Joseph in the New Testament that he is in the line, the royal line. But I don't know at this time who was. That's a good question. I've never seen anybody address that. All right, so Aristobulus was a brutal ruler. And we'll come back and talk more about him tomorrow. We're not finished yet, so the quiz over the intertestamental period won't be till Friday. Any questions? And I think there are a couple short answers, but everything else is multiple choice. So you don't have to try to come up with names and stuff. Just recognize them.
All right, I have a question.
Yeah.
About Joseph being on line of throne. Like,